I don't recall a time when I didn't know that there was a river in this town, that it was part of our daily lives. There was an awareness that that river had been here and had been sustaining us and was a vital source of survival for millennia. There were family stories. My father always talked about his grandmother washing her clothes, her family's clothes, in the river. By the time I was 3, I have clear memories of going by the side of the river with family and watching it. And then as I grew older, I think as an adolescent, was when I fully began to absorb the impact of a river whose windy path goes right through the heart of a town. There's something very symbolic about this being our circulatory system.
Visitors to San Antonio, Texas in the 19th century routinely praised the city for its charm and cosmopolitan atmosphere. As Frederick Law Olmsted wrote in 1854, it was a jumble of races, costumes, and languages. Like many other American cities, it was also in a century-long process of geographically separating races and classes. By the time Carmen Tafolla was born on July 29, 1951, on San Fernando Street, the west side barrios of San Antonio were exclusively Mexican-American. Many streets were unpaved, there were no public libraries, schools were underfunded and overcrowded, and drainage and many other city services were lacking. Mexican-Americans were definitely second-class citizens.
As I think back of what the West Side represented, the front yards that were decorated in whatever art objects were available, whether they were made from bottle caps put onto an old bathtub to create a grotto, whether there were bird houses hung throughout the yard, and hierbitas, herbs and spices and flowers growing all over the yard, this jungle of sentient experiences. That's what the West Side was for me. There was tough stuff. There was the significance of oppression and of social injustice, and that kind of just set the background stage. It set the drama for the human story that was going on. But there was a tremendous amount of creativity. There was a tremendous amount of pride. You know, you see it in some of the photographs. I flip back through my family photographs, and I see pictures of somebody, my mom, standing next to my dad's new car in 1947. They're really excited, his first car. And in the background are these falling apart fences from a gallinero, you know. But they took those kinds of things and they innovated and they elaborated and they brought beauty out of what was there. And I think those qualities are still there in the West Side, of taking what's there and creating beauty out of whatever was available, making the lemonade out of the lemons. This was long before we officially had any Chicano studies or had any articles talking about rascuachismo, and yet this was the essence of rascuachismo. It was taking that which was everyday and appreciating it, valuing it. It was a respeto, and it was very different in terms of opportunities. We did not have public libraries on that side of town. We did not have the paved streets or the access to parks or really any attention from the city administrators on what the potential or the realities, the permanence was in the West Side. And we had people who'd lived there for generations.
A long struggle for equality under the law was just beginning in America, and Carmen Tafolla would be a part of that struggle. Carmen's grandparents lived not far from San Fernando Street on Buena Vista Street. La Familia Tafolla had lived in San Antonio for well over 150 years, but the family's history went much further back. The first Tafolla born in the Americas was Juan de Tafolla Altamirano, who was born in 1640. His grandson, General Felipe Tafolla, was the alcalde of Santa Fe, New Mexico in the 1770s. Felipe's great-grandson was Santiago Tafolla, born in 1837, who brought the family name to San Antonio. Santiago Sr. was a writer, and his memoir of his life as a scout, Indian fighter, Confederate soldier, and Methodist minister, among many other adventures, and as a victim of racism, is one of the most important documents of its era. One of Santiago's sons, Santiago Jr., was an early activist and among the founders of the School Improvement League, the Cruz Azul Mexicano, and other Mexican-American defense organizations in the 1920s and 30s. One of Santiago Sr.'s granddaughters was Carmen Tafolla.
I always knew that my family was really from San Antonio. I always knew that we belonged here. My father was very good at filling me in on the street that had the mesquite blocks on it, and the fact that his mother and his grandmother had told him about those mesquite blocks. So I knew that we had a family history here. And then when I was about 13, I found out much more about my great-grandfather, who was a Santiago Tafolla, born in New Mexico, but came to San Antonio in 1855, 57, around there. And so I knew that we had a family history here. I knew that he married my great-grandmother, and I knew that her mother had a seamstress shop in downtown San Antonio, probably in the 1820s, 1830s, possibly 1840s. So I knew we preceded the United States government, and I knew we preceded the Republic of Texas. As I got older, I found out that we preceded the Republic of Mexico in San Antonio. And then about 3 months ago, I found out that my great-grandmother's mother, who had the seamstress shop downtown, was the great-granddaughter of Domingo Flores de Abrego, who was one of the soldiers at the Presidio in San Antonio in 1718.
Growing up on the west side of San Antonio in the 1950s and 60s was not easy, and a mood of protest was growing. Carmen got into it early. At the age of 4, we find a photograph of her on the front page of the San Antonio Light newspaper, measuring the depth of a pothole with a yardstick. In her early teens, she attended Rhodes Middle School, reputedly the roughest school on the west side, which she memorialized in her poem, When I Dream Dreams. By a fluke of random testing and a temporary extension of goodwill, she was given a scholarship to attend high school at Keystone, a private school for gifted students. That led to scholarships from Austin College in Sherman, Texas, and Texas Lutheran College in Seguin, where Carmen earned her BA and MA degrees. In short order, she earned her PhD in bilingual education from the University of Texas at Austin, joining the ranks of the very few Chicana PhDs in this country.
And then I met a Chicano poet who had been published, and that was Reyes Cárdenas. And I thought this was just the most fantastic thing in the world. A Chicano poet who actually has had a poem published. This was an impossibility. It sounds so common today. It sounds so doable today. But at that time, you had to really... I didn't know anybody that had been published with a Chicano poem. This was a rarity. When the Festival Floricanto announced that it was going to be in Austin, the second one, the first one had been in California, I said, I can actually make it to Austin, I can be there. So I went, I read, I was very well received. I almost didn't read. I was scared. I I didn't intend to read. It was an accident. But my name was on the program, and I had a choice. By the time I got there and I saw my name on the program, I could either disappear off into the restroom when they call my name, or I could leave the conference when they call my name, or I could read. So I read. And it was so well received that I began to realize that what I was writing, just as a documentation of my own life, just to affirm my own experiences as you would write in a diary, might have some benefit to somebody else, might have some relevance to somebody else. They wanted to publish it here and there and there, and pretty soon those 5 poems that I read started being published.
By the mid-1970s, Carmen was publishing poetry in Chicano literary magazines like Caracol and El Magazine. Her first book was published in 1976. Get Your Tortillas Together was a collaboration with 2 other South Texas poets, Reyes Cardenas and Cecilio Garcia Camarillo.
It was a on the kitchen floor press. Everybody was sitting there cutting and pasting and editing, and what do we put on the cover? Well, Cecilio would say to his wife, "Mia, didn't you have an art piece over there? Something you were scribbling on the bring it over here." And so pretty soon, a book was put together, and we put together Get Your Tortillas Together. I was very excited, and Cecilio and Reyes and I went 3 blocks down to where there was a notary public, and we got out a copyright license on it and raised our hands and signed, and it became a book. And this was that self-empowerment that was so typical of the Chicano movement. It was the realization that whether we are accepted or not, whether we are backed by monetary sponsors or not, we can make things happen. We can revolutionize the way things happen. And we did. And that was an incredible experience in self-empowerment, deciding that you can make things happen.
In the 1970s, Tafolla became the head writer for Sonrisas, a pioneering bilingual television show for children. And in 1973, she became the first Chicana faculty member to direct a Chicano Studies Center in the United States at Texas Lutheran College in Seguin.
Angela de Hoyos was a wonderful role model for young writers. She polished her poems, she worked on them, she showed up at every event that she could show up at. Moises, her husband, came with her, and he carried his camera. He was something of a geek, He carried these big heavy cameras with long lenses on them that, would get up close pictures. He carried his tape recorder. He carried a bigger tape recorder. Years later, he carried this great big video recorder, to get actual moving pictures of events that were going on. Between them, they documented so many early readings. Sometimes they were recordings of very poor quality, but there was a documentation of what had gone on. And then they realized that they could not only document it, they could help make it happen by putting their own press together. By then, Cecilio was no longer in San Antonio, and he had gone on to, I believe the first stop was Albuquerque. And Angela and Moises felt there wasn't anybody here to help the young writers, any of the writers, publish Chicano works. So they started cranking out books in their garage from M&A Editions, Moises and Angela, M&A. And then Angela didn't just wait for people to submit things to her. She came up to me and she said, "Carmen, we are going to publish your next book." Because the only book I had out was Get Your Tortillas Together, co-authored with Cecilio and Reyes, and it was kind of out of print by then. And I had another book, but it had gone to a couple of small presses, and they held on to it for a while, and then they realized they didn't have the funds to do it, and they turned it back, and Angela said, I'm going to do it. So I had a curandera manuscript, and all I remember was turning over the poems to her. And she said, do you have an artist in mind? Do you have someone in particular? I said, yes, I know a wonderful young artist called Thelma Ortiz Murayda. I love her work. We work well together. And I'd love to have her work on the cover. Well, Thelma came up with 4 beautiful paintings, plus a cover painting. And the 4 sections of the book each have this, what I call a Khalil Gibran type design, sprouting straight out of Mexican-American culture on the West Side, showing her grandma's porched screen door, and an elderly curandera whose tecito that she's offering you for the section called un tecito, a little bit of a remedy, a little bit of a cure for the ills of society in that one section of the poetry book. She draws this beautiful big cup of tea, and the steam from the cup blends into the folds of the old woman's rebozo. So the curandera herself is offering you this cup of tea, and you don't know where the lines between the tea end, where the steam ends, where the rebozo ends, where the elderly one. It's a beautiful, beautiful illustration. So, but Angela turned it into a book. It became, she did the design, and she, respected the artist, and she incorporated the artist's work, and the little gem, Curandera, was produced.
Dr. Tafolla's first full-length collection of poetry, Curandera, came out in 1983. Many of Tafolla's early poems employ the bilingual idiom of the city's west side. She has long been regarded as one of the masters of this type of poetic code switching, and Curandera is considered by scholars to be a core document in this regard.
Mestizaje, the whole concept of people blending together, people being related to the rest of the world, of 2 different worlds coming together and creating something new, has always been a part of my writing. Because I too was was raised in a cultural mestizaje, as Virgil Elizondo and several other scholars have written. We're raised in a cultural mix of Mexican traditions and Anglo-American traditions. We're in an Anglo-American context with Anglo-American political history being taught and all this. So I identified with that mestizaje, that mixing.
Many other books followed. Books of poetry, nonfiction works, collections of short fiction, books for young children and young adults. The author of Roots, Alex Haley, called Tafolla a world-class writer. Ana Castillo called her a pioneer of Chicano literature. Dr. Tafolla has performed her poetry all over the world, and her literary honors are too numerous to name, but the 2 she values most were both given to her in her hometown of San Antonio. St. Mary's University presented her with its Art of Peace Award for writings that contribute to peace, justice, and human understanding. In April of 2012, Dr. Tafolla was honored to be named as the first ever Poet Laureate of San Antonio. Along the way, Dr. Tafolla has held a variety of faculty and administrative posts at universities throughout the Southwest, from California State University at Fresno to Northern Arizona University, to her current position as the writer-in-residence for children's, youth, and transformative literature at the University of Texas at San Antonio. But wherever she has gone, San Antonio has always been home. This river here, she has written, referring to the San Antonio River, is part of you and me. The words of Carmen Tafolla have become a part of us all as well.
And I think it was just a testament to both the hunger that we had to see our cultural arts documented and distributed, and also the belief, the stubborn belief that we had that the world could be changed, and it was in our hands to make it happen.